The Great Turkey Walk, Chapter 8. Now, as I see it, Mr. Peace was saying, we got a couple things on our side. The three of us and Emmett was huddled under a lean-to of branches and leaves we'd cobbled together against the rain still falling fast and furious. A little fire sputtered bravely before us, and we was warming our hands by it. Unfortunately, our hands was the only things going to get warm this night. Between the weather and the early darkness, even Jabez hadn't been able to catch a supper. What might they be, those things on our side? I asked. Jabez shivered between us, but gave Mr. Peace a hopeful look. First off, my drover says, your pa and that Cleaver person don't expect us to be unbound this quick, nor do they expect us to be pursuing them. They just took it for plumb natural that we'd give up entire. Mr. Peace held out a second finger. Next, they don't look like the sort to know a thing about turkeys. After the way they treated that fine horse flesh. You think they's likely to destroy my birds? I worried aloud. Miss Rogers, she's counting on me to get 'em straight through to Denver, all 1,000 of 'em. And there's bound to be some loss, Simon, Mr. Peace cut in, even without extraordinary circumstances. And we got us some extraordinary circumstances right now. And it's all my fault, I mourned. If I hadn't a wanted to see them lions and tigers and camels the way I did. Don't you go berating yourself, Simon. It was a true educational urge. Ain't ever nothing wrong with one of them. Mr. Peace absently petted Emma in his lap. But there's always a surprise tucked in somewheres, and your paw turned into a very wild one indeed. Jabez shifted to get his bare feet closer to the flames. Tell us some more about what we got going for us, Mr. Peace, sir. I needs to know. Bidwell Peace smiled. What remaining teeth he had flashed real nice. Why, we got you, Jabez. They don't know about you at all. After Jabez finished beaming, Mr. Peace wrapped up our planning session. Now, I think we all ought to get us some sleep. Come first light, we catch up with them rustlers, sneaky-like. Don't let 'em know we's about. We'll do things extemporaneous from there. It wasn't any hardship rising early in the morning. I was stiff all over from the damp and cold and not having near enough sleep on account of the drips of water that hit me regular through our roof during the night. I missed my blankets and I missed my breakfast. Most of all, I missed the comforting gobbles of my turkeys. Who'd have thought a blood father could take all that away from his only son? Ain't May Bell's railing about Pa over the years came back to me. Least she'd been correct about that one thing. I stretched to rid my mind of the thought and turned to my companions. Hey, Jabez! My friend seemed able to sleep through anything. I gave him a gentle boot. Mr. Peace, time to turn out and move on. We loped down the center of the muddy road to warm ourselves. For a comfort, at least the rain had slowed to a misty drizzle. After about a mile, we passed a lone, deserted-looking farmhouse. I saw Jabez perk up and start paying attention. You see some breakfast lying about, Jabez? I asked, sort of jocular-like. Didn't really expect an answer, but Jabez, he broke into a sprint. Then he yelled back, Come and get it! Emmett reached him first, then me. By the time Mr. Peace puffed up, Jabez already had me hanging on to the horns of an old brown cow, lowing something pitiful she was. Small wonder, since she badly needed milking. We're going to do us a good deed all around, Jabez said. But first, I need your hat, Mr. Peace, sir. Mr. Peace clamped onto his old slouch topper fast. My hat? What on earth for? He looked at Jabez, then studied the cow. Slowly it began to dawn on him. No. Why, no way am I going to. He kept spluttering, hanging on to that hat. "This headgear and me, we's gone through hell and beyond together. How'd you expect me to—" Jabez held out his hand, patient and expectant both. Mr. Peace gave up on his hat, slowly. In a few minutes the old cow was almost sighing with relief, and we were taking turns drinking our fill of warm milk from that very disreputable hat. When we couldn't swallow any more, Emmett got his turn. That dog was so appreciative he licked out every last drop, then picked up the brim between his teeth and trotted the hat back to his master. "What do you expect me to do with this now?" Mr. Peace crumbled the soggy felt hat in his hands. Disgust shone all over his face. "Put it back where it belongs," I laughed. "We might need it again come dinner time." It wasn't but another mile along that we saw the first signs of my deepest fears. One lone bronze turkey was straggling down the road, looking as lost as ever he could be. I whistled, then set in to making a little turkey small talk. That Tom trots right up to me. I mean it, I never saw such a grateful look in any bird's beady eyes. I fondled his miserable wet feathers, the whole yard from his neck to the tip of his tail. "Look sharp, Jabez, Mr. Peace. We may be closing in on the rascals." Come mid-afternoon, the sun had broken through the clouds with a kind of milky light that reminded me of breakfast. By this time, Emmett was feeling much better. So were the rest of us. We'd rounded up near 100 of my birds. They'd been found in dribs and drabs, forlorn in trees, pecking despondently by the side of the road. Jabez even fetched one from the very mouth of a fox. Got him a nice fox pelt in the bargain, and the turkey's neck was not even broken yet either. I began to feel a little sorry for my pa. If this was the way he intended to make his fortune, he'd find himself in Denver with only about a dozen turkeys for his trouble. Mr. Peace must have been considering the same thing because he inspected our little flock and grinned. "At the rate we're going, boys, all we'll have to do is stay a few steps behind the rogues. In a day or two, we'll have us all our birds back in hand." "But not the wagon and supplies," I reminded him. "Not to mention Sparky and the rest of my fine mules." Jabez flipped my bowie knife as graceful as one of Miss Lila's turns on that flying swing. "Only thing concerns me is the guns they got. I don't take to guns when they's in somebody else's hands." "Me neither," I agreed. "Got to catch 'em when their guns is elsewhere." Mr. Peace reckoned, "Maybe while they're asleep." "Now that's an idea." I continued down the road. "Take left flank, Emmett, but don't hurry 'em too hard now. We don't want to turn a bend and bump into my paw." We waited till our little flock was roosted comfortably for the night in a small patch of woods, then set off along the next piece of road. 2 miles before that, we'd got through the village of Russellville, practically on the tails of Paul and Cleaver. At least that's what the local folks said when they sees us coming. But they said it from behind curtained windows and doors just barely ajar. "You with them other turkey people?" That was a sort of a whisper, and I had to hunt around to find where it came from. It was a small boy peeking out the crack of a door. "Not on your life. We're after 'em for stealing my birds." "Ain't you got no guns?" "Don't believe in guns." A communal sigh issued forth from the houses, and heads started poking out, first slowly, then with indignation. "They was waving them weapons around most dangerous. That slim gambler-looking fella, he shoots his off, just 'cause my boy helped himself to one of them birds. Lord knows there was enough." I swiveled around right quick to make certain Emmett and Jabez had our flock strictly in hand. They did. "So how many did you get from the villains?" I asked, casual-like. A giggle came from the window farther down the street. "About half a dozen. All big uns. After the way they was acting, we figured them birds was fair game." "Russellville's feasting tonight," said someone else with a laugh. Still like to get my hands on them fellas, feast or not," concluded another hidden body. After those final comments, I herded my troop along the main and only street with considerable more energy. Granted, these folks had been pressed some, but it didn't strike me that the good people of Russellville was entirely ethical. Not by a long shot. I was sincerely happy to see the end of that village and its 2 churches. I was still fuming over those lost 6 birds when we'd bedded the others and set off for Paul and Cleaver. After all we'd gone through this far, to have my stock disappear that a ways. Why, 6 turkeys was worth, I figured on exactly what they was worth for near a mile. It just come to me when Emmett let out a growl. Mr. Peace clamped a hand on the dog's muzzle fast. Shh! They must be dead ahead. There was a hill in front of us, with a line of trees skirting the road. Beyond was nothing but tall grass. I bolted into the grass fast. Jabez and Mr. Peace followed. We snuck up the hill on our bellies, then spied down on a campsite. The last of the day's hazy sun floated over the other 900 or so of my turkeys that was scratching out sleeping nests amid the tall grass surrounding the supply wagon. And there was Sparky and Snowball and my other mules grazing peacefully alongside them prize Arabians. My, but it was a solace to set eyes on them all again. It was a perfect scene, aside from the fact that none of it belonged to me at the moment, the way it should have. I cast my eyes back to the western sky. Now the sun was disappearing into a bank of dark clouds. There'd be light for another hour. Maybe. No thanks to the pitiful attempts at a fire Paul and Cleaver was busy concocting in the center of the camp down below. They went at it like they'd never had need to start one before, and they was arguing up a storm the entire time. They sure was a blight on the beauties of beasts and nature in general. "You're so ready to use that revolver of yours, Cleaver. How is it you didn't wing one of them villagers when they went after our birds?" Paul was griping. "Shut your mouth, Samson. I was doing the best I could. It ain't easy being cowherd to a bunch of stupid turkeys." "I should say not. You've been letting them slip through your fingers a livelong day. All the while you were driving the wagon. The easy job." "We flipped on that up front, Cleaver. Is it my fault I got heads this morning?" "And yesterday afternoon, too. It's against the law of averages. I'd like to see the dollar you flipped with, Samson. Both sides. If it ain't two-headed, I'll eat my—" The thigh-thick sopping branch what Paul was balancing on his shoulder swung dangerously close to Cleaver's head. "You accusing me of cheating, Cleaver? Thought you was the expert in that department." Cleaver ducked and backed off. He must have set his gun down somewheres, otherwise I knew it would be pointing at my paw this very instant. "Got to cool that temper of yours, Samson Green." Paul shifted his load again threateningly. "Look who's talking, mister." Cleaver backed some more and tried on a little weasel smile. "Why don't I just fetch that side of bacon I found in the wagon, Samson? It's been a long day. A good hot supper, and everything will look better." "Won't look no better till we hit Denver," Paul concluded. "How that simple-minded boy of mine got as far as Jefferson City with this freakish animal show is beyond me. Skittering turkeys, mules what hates my guts." Paul finally set down the 5-foot branch and fished out a matchbox. Next to me, Jabez was convulsing himself with laughter he was trying to swallow. "He thinks he's going to set that Yule log afire with a match," he whispered. I cracked a grin, too. "Don't know where exactly my Paul's been all the rest of his life," I said, "but I guess the circus don't teach you no useful skills." Paul and Cleaver finally gave up on the fire and attacked my side of bacon raw. Next, they both smoked a cigar, glaring at each other across the unlit fire the entire time. By then it had gone full dark, and it was hard to see aught but the glowing tips of those cheeroots. But a body could feel those glares passing between the two, even way up here on the hill. At last, without another word, they both wrapped up in blankets for the night. "Sleep well, Paul," I murmured, "'cause it's going to be a short rest for you and Cleaver." By the time the snores from the camp below started drifting up our hill, Mr. Peace was already adding to them. I let him nap a good hour, since I knew he could use it. Then I nudged Jabeth. "You ready?" "Raring to go." Jabeth grinned. He was already flashing my bowie knife. If there was a moon, that blade'd be blazing up a storm. "Mr. Peace?" I turned to the drover. His eyes shot open. "We're heading down to camp now. Can you keep Emmett quiet?" He shifted up on his elbows from the damp grass. "I'll carry him. Should do the trick." "Fine. You three stand watch over Cleaver whilst I attend to my paw." I was already unwrapping the wad of Paul's rawhide. I was already unwinding the length of Paul's rawhide that I'd had wrapped around my waist since being rescued yesterday. "Sure you can handle him yourself, son. The man's got prodigious strength." "I got me some of that strength too, Mr. Peace, plus some righteous anger. I figure I owe it to Paul to even accounts between us." "You got a point, Simon. Good luck to us all." It turned out way easier than I expected. Paul's rifle was lying by his head, and first thing I did was quietly move it way out of range. As he was sleeping on his belly, all I did next was set a knee into his back, add a little weight, and grab for his flapping arms. His roar of outrage liked to wake the livestock. "What fiend is a climbing my back?" "Rest easy, Paul. It's only Simon, your simple-minded son." My fingers was already making quick work with the rawhide knots I was constructing around his wrist. "I hate to do this, Paul. It hurts me real bad, but you didn't leave me no choice." In a moment, I was throwing off the blankets and hog-tying Paul's wrists to his ankles. Had to turn around and sit on him to accomplish that, though. All the time, Paul was writhing and spouting a lot of words that would have turned Miss Rogers gray premature. Aunt Maybelle, too. I fished in my pocket and pulled out the huge handkerchief. "Got something here that belongs to you, Paul. Thought you might like it back." I turned Paul over and began stuffing the gag down his throat. Maybe not quite as tender as he'd done the job on me a day earlier. It ain't necessarily a sign of manliness to talk such talk, Paul. Brave actions and a gentle heart, Miss Rogers always said, is how those was the things that truly make a man. My eyes caught Paul's through the darkness. They was glaring like that tiger's back at the circus, with sheer anger and frustration. I guess mine glared a little right back before I raised my head from my efforts at last. "How you people doing over there?" Mr. Peace had finally released Emmett, and the dog had Cleaver's pistol hand firmly between his teeth. My, but he had spunk for such a little critter. Jabeth was starting with the other rawhide rope from the feet up, and my drover was happily gagging the coconut man. I let the boys finish up with Mr. Cleaver, then checked the bonds. They was good and strong. Finally, Mr. Peace seemed to notice me. "What next, Simon? How do we dispose of them so's they won't get back into our hair right quick?" "I got me some ideas about that, Mr. Peace. I truly do. But first things first." I bent over Cleaver and felt for his pockets. Nothing there. Then I thought to try his belt. "What you doing, Simon?" Jabeth asked. "We ain't no thieves." "Not by a long shot." A grin spread over my face as I felt the thickness of the belt. I split it open and out spilled coins. But Paul and Cleaver owe me for 6 turkeys, Denver price. Also for a few more that probably strayed past us during the day. And I already turned out Paul's pockets. They was sheer empty, aside from that double-headed silver dollar of his. I let him keep that, as he might be needing it down the road, the way his luck's been turning. I began counting the $5 gold pieces. 6 of these would make $30. That's for Russellville's turkey feast, I said. I want to be fair, Mr. Peace, and you ain't got as much invested as me. What you figure I should have beyond? Mr. Peace bent to finger the pile. I was counting them nesting birds in the sunset, Simon. Seems like another 15 gold pieces ought to cover the damage. I completed the transaction and got to my feet. All right then, Mr. Peace, you and Emmett stay on here at the main camp for the night. Jabeth and me are going to load up the mules with these gentlemen and give them a ride back to Russellville. The folks there expressed some interest in meeting up with them again. While Jabeth grinned in anticipation, I glanced around the campfire, sorting out the last arrangements in my mind. The only other thing to decide about is those prize horses. Should I be leaving them in Russellville with Pa and Cleaver, Mr. Peace? He rubbed at a cheek. I don't know, Simon. On the one hand, it'd be just like putting temptation smack into your pa's hands again. On the other, those Russellville folks are just as likely to latch onto the horses themselves, considering their record for high principles. I'd sure hate to have the circus folks accuse us of rustling, Mr. Peace, in case they ever come looking for that horse flesh. We didn't open any barn doors, Simon, no matter how you look at it. We were not the ones who took them out of the circus. And it is a fine breeding pair. I'm thinking they'll go for a decent price in Denver if we was to treat 'em right along the way. Then again, they'd make a good start to somebody's establishment if he was considering starting a ranching-type establishment out that ways. Mr. Peace stopped, then started in again. Mules is fine creatures in and of themselves, but you got to admit, Simon, you got to admit they ain't got no breeding future whatsoever. That being possibly the longest speech I ever heard from Mr. Peace, it took a moment to work around its ramifications. Aside from the obvious fact, which was that mules couldn't make young'uns. The bottom line was that Mr. Peace was already in love with those prize Arabians. I could see his feelings clear through the night's darkness. I nodded and spun away. Fine, we'll take a chance with the horses. Meanwhile, Jabeth and me, we'll stop the night with the other birds and see you here in the morning. Then, I finished, then we can move on to Denver. Mr. Peace smiled with evident relief. Couldn't have planned it better myself, son. End of chapter 8.